Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mini Ninja speaking. Normally I try to shy away from newer titles, sticking to retro titles, mostly on account that I get too many damn copyright notices on anytime I try to do a newer title, but I want to at least make an attempt to do just kind of a short Cole's Note review of a particular title I've been playing that's based off an animated series that probably a handful of people have heard of, called Legend of Korra. This is basically, Activision was the one who got the rights for it, but the people who actually made the title themselves would be Platinum Games, which is what caught my attention here. Mind you, while it's got an interesting pedigree being based off the Avatar The Last Airbender series, there are a few quirks I have with this particular game, which we'll go into in a second. Before we get too much into the nitty-gritty of this particular title, at least for the short review here, I'm actually going to warn you out, yes, there are going to be spoilers for certain gameplay elements and kind of story elements that will be appearing during the course of this title. So if you don't want to be prematurely spoiled in terms of what's going to go on, if you want to go and check out the game for yourself, now's the time to stop the video. Once I remove Korra, we'll be discussing things in earnest again. Which will be in 1 second. Alright, now that we finally got the game itself, one of my chief criticisms actually begins. Technically it starts here, but here it is in its offensive. In the game isn't too long, but every stage effectively involves some sort of tutorial system. The reason why is because after the events of the very first chapter, where we have Korra in what's actually a bit of a time jump considering the timing of this game and what the events are, we have all of our bending abilities right here as kind of a testing, so you can kind of get the idea of what the basics look like for all of the bending styles. But getting into the very next chapter, which is very shortly after, we're actually going to lose all of our bending abilities as part of a convenient plot device for the game. And every time we re-earn some bending abilities, basically re-earn a different style, we end up doing that style's form of a tutorial along the way, which involves basically completing some tasks, which are another form of tutorial themselves, in order to relearn a style, with the exception of water bending. Alright, just to give you the heads up, if you're looking for a long title, Legend of Korra is not it. At this downloadable title, which is like give or take $15 or something like that off PSN, you're really looking at about 6 stages, with the majority of them being broken up into 2 parts. The first part is going to be an action part like this, and the second part is usually kind of a Naga-based racing section where you're trying to do an obstacle course, really, using bending to help you go along a self-design or kind of a pre-designed course, picking up spirit energy and dodging things while you try to get to the finish line. The first stage, this prologue thing, plays a little bit different because the second section here is actually basically the game's tutorial version to teach you how to do pro bending, which is going to be an unlockable mode later on once you beat the main story. You're going to hear me say a lot of tutorial based stuff because unfortunately, with everything past the first 2 stages, actually no, all of the stages after this point, including technically this first one, revolve around some form of tutorial that's going to be going on here. In the very first stage, this prologue one, your tutorial is pro bending. In your next stage, which believe it or not, the big premise here is somehow after the events of this stage, you end up losing your bending. Your stage 2 tutorial is how to do the Naga races. Stage 3, which is technically the only exception to every stage being broken up into 2 parts, you relearn water bending. And all the rest of the stages along the way, you have to do tutorials and basically kind of random menial tasks, it feels like at times, to relearn the rest of your bending styles, relearn how to enter the avatar state, and basically everything up till the very end is going to be a tutorial of some form or another in order to get back any sort of major skill. Suffice to say that yes, that is going to get rather annoying as it goes on, especially since certain feats you need to do in order to unlock those skills are actually rather annoying in order to accomplish until you unlock the skill itself, which will make repeated gameplays that much easier, actually. I found that anytime I revisit any of the stages, it made that previous stage a lot more easy. Basically a cakewalk the next time around once you have whatever you were supposed to unlock in that stage in the first place. In fact, let me give you the exact details involved with unlocking the other bending states. For getting your water bending back, it's actually just as simple as collecting 4 of a specific token item that appears in the related stage. For getting your earth bending back, you have to complete 4 successful counterattacks. In order to get your your fire bending back, you have to complete a combo or keep up a combo 40 consecutive hits in that stage. And what was honestly surprising to me, in order to get your airbending back, you didn't have to do 4 or 40 of something, but it gave you a different random number of dodges that you had to complete at the last minute in order to get your airbending back. For the most part, it's complete X tasks this many times in order to do anything in this game. It's actually rather redundant. It feels really redundant after a certain point, especially since some of those skills you learned really early on. Yeah, that's how I feel too, Korra, about those tasks. Unfortunately, you're going to be seeing a lot of repetition in terms of enemy type too. Understandably, since this is in the middle of 2 different chapters, you're not going to be seeing too much of anything new in this title per se, but it still doesn't explain why most of our enemy ensemble is consisting of almost entirely chi blockers, a handful of triad, and other enemy types for the mid-bosses, and a few mecha tanks for good measure, until we reach the last 2 stages, which is when we begin to start seeing something a little different. Speaking of things that will grow repetitive, long before they should, you're going to end up seeing a lot of the Naga sections, I can promise, unless you've already watched the game or other people playing it, because quite frankly, I find the Naga sections are part reaction, part trial and error in terms of how to handle things. Wonder why they told you to turn left or right in that section? As it turns out, even though this is kind of an on-rails racing thing, the game will not automatically turn at corners for you, so you can actually run straight into objects. Another thing it doesn't tell you is that when you're sliding under objects or have to do something like that, the camera is terrible and will not let you really look at anything once you're moving there. There's an example of the no auto turn I was talking about. But yeah, for the most part, you have to really kind of play the game over and over again for these sections to really get a good idea of what's going to be coming up next, and hope that your reaction is really good enough in order to get you through those sections. How grading works in here is basically a combination of how quickly you can get through the obstacle course, as well as how much spirit energy you can collect along the way. I am really tired of tutorials, and this is just stage 2. The only silver lining I can give you regarding these sections is, after you re-earn your bending abilities from other stages, you can indeed go back and replay these sections with those additional bending skills that you get related intact. That had to hurt. Of course, no Legend of Downloadable video is complete without talking about these 3 jerks. I hope you get used to looking at that particular intro, because you can actually see it quite a few times throughout the course of the game, as unfortunately this particular trio will be making constant reappearances throughout the title in this exact format. Mind you, they'll occasionally have some different color clothes, but it's going to be the same annoying 3-on-1 fight, where realistically, in order to get through the game, it's going to be you countering their attacks and then countering their counters to your attacks. You're going to probably need to play this section more than once during your first gameplay, unless you happen to really know how the pattern works. But thankfully, when you start powering up your bending later on, it does get a bit easier. Keyword being easier, not necessarily more fun. The thing is, it takes a while in order to get the build up there. Namely, you have to get through all the different stages to really unlock your bending skills. But once you do accomplish that and start leveling up a bit, the game and the gameplay with Korra becomes genuinely enjoyable, I find. because quite frankly, they do make all the different styles different enough from each other to make it an interesting way to express yourself, how you battle your various opponents. And there's honestly a lot of interesting stuff that's kind of get thrown in there with the different styles set up. Obviously, if you're using earthbending, you're going to have a more solid series of attacks, although realistically it's not very combo heavy. But if you're trying to beat people off the ground, it's a perfect thing. Firebending is really great for really quick kind of forward moving attacks. Airbending is kind of a good keep away style, and as a side note, also makes quite a few references to things you would find in Capcom titles. And waterbending is a good long distance style, and probably the only one that has really good, or actually really I should say any long distance projectiles as part of it. And once you start unlocking the different levels and their abilities through experience, you can get some really nice stuff that comes in there. So it takes unfortunately a lot of time in order to get there, but once you have it and you're closer to a more complete avatar, the gameplay becomes really fun. Alright, my last real notes for this kind of semi-review here is that first thing you need to know about this game, it's a Platinum Games title. What that means? The camera work is going to be a little spotty at times. You might have noticed it a bit during the review there. In terms of difficulty of the game, I'm playing right now on normal difficulty for all the footage here. The game feels kind of a bit above average difficulty compared to some other action platformers, but that's just kind of what Platinum Games does. So that's kind of their thing there. It's under the rating of firm but fair in terms of difficulty. And probably the biggest gripe I have regarding this title is just there are too many tutorials that are thrown in there every time you really need to relearn a bending style. And the way to do it, it kind of breaks the otherwise fluid nature of the rest of the game up to that point, which honestly, it's kind of bothersome and unfortunate, because especially once you start getting everything unlocked for Korra and you're back to a more complete avatar, the game and its combat becomes really nice and fluid. You can honestly have a lot of fun countering attacks, bouncing people all over the place, changing from one style of bending to another on the fly through the use of the shoulder buttons. Honestly, there's a lot of the combat system that's there to like once you start getting used to it and you have everything actually at your disposal. It's just unfortunate it takes such a long time throughout the course of technically a short game in order to get there. In terms of if I would recommend this game, if you're a fan of the general series and the general Avatar universe, yes, it's a much better representation than the previous Avatar game, and yeah, you'll probably be enjoying it there, even if the story for this game is a bit lacking, because honestly it had to be fit between two different seasons, so they really couldn't introduce anything too new there that couldn't be self-contained within the game. If you're a fan of action games as general and you happen to like other stuff that Platinum has done in the past, like God Hand, Bayonet, and everything, it's still a pretty good recommendation, I have to be honest. It's unfortunately not as long as those full budget games, because this is kind of it's a nice cash-in, but it's still kind of a cash-in title, I have to be honest. But even then, if you happen to have enough, a little bit of disposable income, basically $15 or so lying around, it's a pretty good way to spend those dollars, I find. Just expect a little bit of a difficulty curve, just because the game does take a bit to get used to until you unlock all your bending skills. But other than that, it's a pretty nice little romp and a good way to spend a few days. Or one particularly long day if you feel like burning through the whole day at once. Anyway, that's my general thoughts on the game. If you're interested, it's available, I believe, on the Xbox Live Network, PlayStation Network, which is the version I've been using for this particular review, and I believe there's a PC version as well, which is available off Steam, I believe. So if you're so inclined, there's a few places you can look for it. And that's all I really have to say regarding this game for now. Be joining you all next time with what should be the next proper episode of Retro Ninja Gaming. I'm pretty sure I figured out exactly what title I want to look at now, so I'll be starting on that shortly. Everyone take care, and catch you all later.